their immune system was not strong enough to fight off these diseases. And of course, a lot of the Europeans died from these diseases as well.
They're at the southern end of Mercer County, the northern end of Beaver County, and I think that what they perceived was the need to get a county seat for themselves so they could help people get to Newcastle.
You don't know what it's like till you're in it. And everybody thought, we're going to go and fight this war. 3 months, we'll be back home. We'll be heroes. We'll marry our girlfriends, be happy, settle down, and eventually become the grand old man who saved the Union, living up on the house on the hill.
Going to look for a job meant taking your lunchbox with you in the morning, because good chances are you were going to find something and be employed that day.
More than 14,000 years ago, Lawrence County was covered by the Wisconsin Glacier, creating the area's rushing creeks, rugged valleys, and rolling hills. The Native Americans roamed the lands as early as 8,000 BC. They were nomadic, following the herds.
They were the hunters and gatherers. They didn't have any tools other than a few projectile points and some flint knives.
Over time, they developed a special spear called the atlatl, which allowed hunters to throw with more power and distance. By 1000 BC, the Native Americans began to establish their own villages.
We refer to them as the Monongahela people, the people that lived here before the Europeans came here.
The Monongahela Indians farmed the land, growing corn, beans, and squash. The people also used stone to create pottery, axes, hammers, and grinding tools, as well as projectile points for their spears and arrows.
And they did a lot of pounding, a lot of pecking, a lot of grinding, and a lot of polishing to make those. And the hours they put into those things must have been tremendous.
The Native Americans also built large mounds in the earth for burial and ceremonial purposes. But as early as 1550, their influence started to fade as Europeans settled the land. 100 years later, the Monongahela people disappeared. Many speculate because of disease brought here by the Europeans. However, another tribe called the Delaware Indians moved into Lawrence County from the east.
Legend has it here at Slippery Rock Creek that a group of Native Americans were chasing after a European settler. And when they came to the water, they attempted to cross, but instead they slipped on rocks like these. Chasing after the European lifestyle would later lead to the Native Americans' demise.
Newcastle was called the Kuskusky Villages. There were 3 main villages in the Kuskusky Villages, and it was a hub.
The Delaware Indians were fascinated by the Europeans' tools and goods, but this interest would cause the Native Americans to slowly lose their identity, and by 1760, many tribes had been forced to move west. While some Native American families continued to linger in present-day Lawrence County at the turn of the 19th century, European settlers began to dominate the area and develop the land. Many relied on farming to make a living.
One of the things that you had was donation and bounty lands, and what occurred was you were either given the land as a soldier, or you were given the land as a, you bought the land off of one of the land trading companies.
Newcastle was the first town to be laid out. Surveyor John Carlisle Stewart arrived in 1798 and plotted the original layout of close to 50 acres. However, the town would soon outgrow these limits. In 1825, Newcastle officially became a borough with fewer than 300 residents, but 25 years later, more than 1,500 people called Newcastle home.
The cities are set along rivers, and when the canals came through, you're going to find that a lot of these cities came into their own power.
The canals allowed companies to bring in iron ore and carry out products from local factories. Just as Newcastle remains the political center in Lawrence County today, the city is tied to the root of the county's formation.
This
This is the line that now separates Lawrence and Mercer counties. However, this wasn't always the case, as Mercer County used to cover the land south of here, near Newcastle. Newcastle was split between Mercer County to the north and Beaver County to the south, causing political problems for the thriving community. Political leaders pushed for the creation of a new county with Newcastle as its headquarters throughout the 1830s and 40s, but they were met with great opposition and a formal petition against the plan.
I think that's one of those things that people would understand completely if they lived in the time. I mean, it's a tax base. That's how things were.
But that would all change in 1847 when David Sankey was elected to the state senate. With his efforts and others' help, an act creating Lawrence County was passed and signed by Governor William Johnston on April 5, 1849.
It was considered a political victory that Lawrence County was even started.
The mid to late 1800s brought a new era for those in Lawrence County. The Civil War broke out and many were quick to respond, even men with little combat experience.
Most of the people who were from here were very, very patriotic, and most of the people who were in weren't trained. They had no experience. You suddenly become a captain or a lieutenant or even a colonel and never have been in uniform before in your life.
4,000 men from the area served in the Northern Army out of the 20,000 people that lived in the county during that time. And nearly 500 of those soldiers lost their lives.
The casualties in the Civil War were greater than any war the country had ever fought and has ever fought since. It staggers the imagination.
2 units were mostly made up of men from Lawrence County, the 43rd Regiment Battery B 1st Artillery, and the 100th Infantry Regiment, known as the Roundheads.
The infantry was the most numerous branch of the service at that time. Cavalry and artillery were much smaller. Cavalry was a smaller group than the artillery.
Local residents also took on leadership roles in the war, including Dr. Daniel Leisure, a physician from Newcastle. He recruited the Roundheads Regiment and later would serve as the colonel for the unit. While those from Lawrence County were fighting for freedom on the battlefield, others at home were helping fugitive slaves find freedom. Right here in the heart of New Wilmington, the Tavern Inn is believed to have been part of the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, the Underground Railroad had several stations in this region. There were a number of other homes in the area. Farmhouses were very good because you had barns where you could put people in and had lots of food available to take care of them there. And also it was more remote and more difficult for the slaveholders to find.
Lawrence County found another way to help out from the home front. People were busy making goods for the troops. And Furnace Hill in New Wilmington originally housed the Fremont Iron Furnace. Workers fired the furnace using charcoal from timber in the surrounding area to make ammunitions for the Union Army. Lawrence County's earliest industries developed from settlers' needs for metal goods, boosting the area's iron production. Having been covered by lush forests before people transformed the countryside, the land was rich in natural resources.
Western Pennsylvania sits on a number of fossil fuels that would become very important in the late 19th century and early 20th century.
The tin plate industry also grew rapidly in Newcastle thanks to the passing of the McKinley Tariff in 1892. The act helped increase domestic production by raising taxes on imported goods.
From a very small operation, we grew to a point that about 1920, we had 60 operating hot mills in Newcastle itself. And we were on the way to becoming one of the fastest growing cities per capita in the United States.
Another important local resource was limestone. Companies utilized limestone as a flux in the steelmaking process, allowing the materials to burn at a higher temperature and a faster rate. This created a more quality steel for constructing bridges and large buildings.
Now, Newcastle itself had its Carnegie Steel Works. In 1901, all those local mills became part of what became U.S. Steel. And U.S. Steel became the largest manufacturer in the United States at that time.
5 major railroads shipped goods in and out, making Newcastle an industrial might and drawing people to the area.
The manpower, the work power came from all walks of life, all over the world actually. Southern Europe, people were coming here in droves because they wanted opportunities that they basically could not find at home.
The factories relied on a large number of workers, so when U.S. Steel closed its stores throughout the county in 1939, the loss hit the community hard.
That decision brought on an unemployment rate that has never been topped. Lawrence County had 52% of the population on direct assistance.
Manufacturing eventually would pick up again at the dawn of World War II, but this time industry took a different route.
We could no longer live basically on one giant manufacturer, that there would have to be a diversification of industry.
While industrialization continued to change and develop here in Lawrence County, the area's first industry of agriculture still remained the #1 big business.
Technology also changed farming and made it more efficient.
A lot of the farmers do both. They have day jobs and they still farm as well. But the days of U.S. Steel and the Greer Tin Mill and the pottery, those days are done. Lawrence County, and really all of western Pennsylvania, has had to find a future and just change its way of doing business.